In March 2021, I uploaded a video called My Experience with Autism that I suspect a large majority of you have already seen. If you haven't, I do really recommend going back and watching that before you watch this. I know that warning never works, but that video will be brought up and its contents are going to be relevant all throughout, so don't say I didn't warn you. I'm not going to fake humility and say that I never expected that video to do as well as it did, because I was aware that it was a topic that was of interest to a lot of people, but the reaction that it got and just some of the things that people have said in response to it have absolutely floored me. From YouTube comments to Twitter DMs to emails, I was very proud of myself for managing to hold it together and not cry at all when recording the voiceover for that video, but some of you broke me, I have to admit. I always thought a YouTube comment would make me cry eventually, just not like this. That's a lie. Nothing anyone in my comment section could ever say could upset me that much. I was actually invited not long ago as I make this video to submit the video to an art competition at a museum in America dedicated to showcasing the work of autistic creators. It took a bit of mulling over because the process was a bit complicated and I don't have the resources to travel to America and really take it all in even if I do win, but hey, I figure it'd be nice to win something and I've got nothing to lose, so fingers crossed, I guess. It also felt a bit funny to submit that video of all things to an art competition when it was the most biographical and least creative thing I'd done with the channel. Obviously I know biographical stuff still has artistic merit, it's just that if you asked me which video I'd like to submit to an art competition, I probably would have said the world's worst review of Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. That's my goddamn magnum opus right there. It's no secret by now that I prefer being creative and silly and irreverent on YouTube when I can. That's just more fun and interesting to me. But the reaction to this video, the fact that I was urged to submit it to a museum, validated something that I'd been thinking to myself in the months after the video's release already. That video is probably the most important thing I've done with my life to date. That I do have a perspective that can be genuinely helpful, and I do worry a bit about the tonal whiplash people might get from seeing me act like a chaotic moron in most of my videos and then being like super vulnerable and stripped back in these ones, but I worry a lot more about having a voice that can bring people some catharsis and not using it. I hope I don't come off as pretentious in saying that. I mean, I am pretentious, but I hope I don't come off that way. But I've been painfully aware of my own autism for going on 10 years now, and as time goes by, I'm realising how rare that actually is. I mentioned in my last video that I was diagnosed at 16 years old, which I called very late, and it seems like in the grand scheme of things that is no longer the case, because if my DMs and comments are any indication, and the conversations I've been having with a lot of my friends lately are any indication, a lot of you guys are starting to get diagnosed too, or at least seeking out the process of a diagnosis, and that's great, and it also reinforces something else I said in the video, that the number of people we recognise as autistic is only going to keep going up. It's not that we've been as overwhelming a minority as we've always been led to believe, it's more so that our screening and testing was not up to snuff, our understanding of the condition was and still is constantly changing, and because, frankly, society didn't really want to know. My sentiment is, and will continue to be this, a lot more people are on the autism spectrum than they realise, and I think we're going to really see that come into play in the coming years. So when you combine that I seem to be in somewhat of a rare camp of people who have known they exist on the spectrum for nearly a decade now, and the fact that I have a completely unstoppable motor mouth, making another video on this topic just seemed to make all the sense in the world. I have a lot to say on this topic, I always will. I kinda like the idea of doing a video about the autism spectrum every year around this time, somewhat close to Autism Awareness Day, which always falls in early April, but hey, I might just drop some more here and there around the year as well. Why not? There's so much to talk about. This video is going to be a lot less fact and statistic heavy than the previous one because I had to do a lot of explaining back then that I won't have to do now because I'm hoping that you've seen the previous one. Instead, I'm just going to kind of talk about some stuff that I haven't covered yet. And so as to not alienate potential new viewers with nothing but non-stop footage of a bunch of random ass video games, I guess I should make an effort to show my big, dumb, stupid face on screen a few times. Ah, this is awkward. Hey, if it were up to me, this whole video would probably be me just talking to the webcam, because ultimately it has very little to do with video games. But for obvious reasons, this video needs to be very carefully scripted, and I need to be very careful about what I say and how I say it, and it wouldn't be very visually interesting to just watch me look at a script back and forth and whatnot. So I'm going to do what I did before and put up some footage of games that were important to me in my childhood for the sake of keeping things visually interesting, because this channel overall as much as I try and make it about comedy or whatever, is also about video games. I think it worked pretty well last time. But before I get into the kind of meat of the video, there's a few corrections that I want to issue and some things that people brought up in comments that I wanted to talk about. Firstly is, I bring up this statistic about 9 minutes into the previous video about how boys are 4 times more likely to have autism than girls. And technically, statistically, that is true, but there's a lot more nuance to that statistic that I should have been able to reach into and talk about. You know, it really might not be as simple as boys being more likely to have autism than girls, as much as it is boys being more likely to have autism found in them than girls, because the diagnostic process, as is the case with almost anything in the world, is very heavily favoured in favour of boys and men, and it's very hard for girls and women to get diagnosed. It might not be as simple as, oh, they are less likely to have it, or oh, they are better at masking and stuff. It's more a matter of the biases and the flaws in our system. It may very well be that girls are just as likely to have autism, or maybe even more likely, I don't know, but there are flaws in our systems that favour diagnoses for boys and men. So to any girls and women who felt excluded by that section, I really do apologise. Like I said, there's a lot of subtext to that statistic. It's not that simple. It's almost definitely not the case that 4 times as many boys just have autism than girls. Let's all just move forward and watch the video with the understanding that girls can obviously definitely have autism. Okay? Hopefully that works. Secondly is the matter of self-diagnosing. Now, I said that in the last video that self-diagnosing is unhealthy and unhelpful, and I stand by that to an extent, but it is a lot more nuanced than that, you know, like a lot of people self-diagnose because that's all they can do. That's the only option they have available to them, because the system, if you're over 16 or over 18, certainly in the UK where I'm from, is completely fucked. You could end up on a waiting list for a year, is like probably quite generous. You can end up on a waiting list more often than not than a lot longer than a year. They send you these kind of pretty silly binary questionnaires that don't really seem like they're going to get to the root of anything, and when you finally do see a specialist, as someone who's over 16 or over 18 or whatnot and has learned to mask a lot of their symptoms, what do? Play up to it? You know, play on your autism? How does that even work? You know, because you really want that diagnosis, and you have to convince them that you're autistic. And I don't know how to do it better, but the current system does not work. It's deeply flawed, and so I understand how a lot of people feel like they have no option left but to self-diagnose. There's nothing else they can do. I just worry about going around and definitively saying that you have something when you're not diagnosed with it, but I get it. I mentioned in that section that I am very confident, I'm very certain, like 95% sure that I have ADHD. It would just make so much sense with so many things in my life. I don't have an official diagnosis with it, but I do think it's very valid to say I am very confident, or I am very sure that I have this thing, and take some kind of solace in that and identify with that. But even if that's not the case, if you've been through the system, you've been failed by it, I don't think you're invalid for just considering yourself to have this thing. It is a slippery slope, but I don't want you to think if you have self-diagnosed that I think you're unreasonable or stupid. I don't think any of those things. I think the system is fundamentally very flawed at the moment. It's bullshit to get a diagnosis, and I do empathise with the struggle of a lot of people who are not getting diagnosed when they should be. And finally, there's the matter of the terms high functioning and low functioning. I've had it pointed out to me, this was news to me, but I've had it pointed out to me that these terms are kind of old hat and we don't use them anymore because they've been used to kind of push merit on people and put people in boxes and withhold things from people, you know, like that they are real labels through and through. High functioning people have had diagnoses and support withheld from them on the basis that they are higher functioning, therefore they're fine, they don't need that much help. And low functioning people have been the targets of bullies and discrimination because look at them, they couldn't hardly function and shit like that. And it's just not, it's a lot more nuanced than that. The terms I've been instructed that people use more often and instructed to use are high support needs and low support needs, which I think is a bit more confusing on paper, but to my understanding, and I'll put something up on screen and maybe link some articles in the description to make sure, but high support needs is someone who needs a lot of support, and low support needs is someone who doesn't even need as much support. And this is less binary because it's less a matter of like how much you can function or how much value you have, and it is just a matter of how much support you need. You know, it's not putting people in boxes to quite that extent and not making people feel invalid, or like they belong to a certain kind of, you know what I mean. Like I said, I'll put some articles and stuff in it. It's complicated and it's nuanced, but I will endeavour to use these terms in the future because people have told me that low functioning, high functioning can be quite harmful, and I would encourage everyone to do the same. Anyway, I think that's it. Hans Asperger's. We don't use the term Asperger's anymore because Hans Asperger's was a Nazi. Yeah, that's pretty fair. Yeah, I think that's everything. Like I say, this video is going to be a lot less structured and fact heavy than the previous video. I'm going to touch on stuff that I didn't get to cover, like modern life, like living as a young adult, what life is like with someone like me in the more modern day, and the perceptions of autism, and other stuff that I didn't get to really talk about. And then I'll probably show back up on camera again late in the video for some other things. There might be kind of an update on, I guess, me and my life in general at the back end if you're interested in that. I'd say it's pretty important if you're interested in the channel. Yeah, I hesitate to say that I hope you enjoy it, but I guess I hope that you get something out of it. Fuck, I never know how to transition out of the parts where I'm on camera into like the actual video. One of the very first comments I got on my experience with autism was someone saying, even though you are on the spectrum, you are one of the smartest YouTubers I know. And while I know this person had good intentions and didn't mean any malice with this comment, this is a beautiful example of how much people misunderstand autism even after my video. Autism is much less to do with outright intellect than people seem to believe, but in the cases when it does seem to impact intelligence, it overlaps far more with higher intellect than lower. I'm going to link a couple studies in the description that prove this. Let me quote one of these studies by an American professor of evolutionary biology, Bernard Crespi. He says, autism has long been characterized by relatively low intelligence as measured by most standard tests. However, a suite of recent studies has demonstrated that alleles for autism, that is, common alleles that each contribute slightly to its risk, overlap substantially and significantly with alleles for high intelligence. Earlier on in the abstract, he pretty much nails everything I'm going to say about the perception of autism. These findings indicate that alleles for autism overlap broadly with alleles for high intelligence, which appears paradoxical given that autism is characterized overall by below average IQ. This paradox can be resolved under the hypothesis that autism etiology commonly involves enhanced but imbalanced components of intelligence. This hypothesis is supported by convergent evidence showing that autism and high IQ share a diverse set of convergent correlates, including large brain size, fast brain growth, increased sensory and visual spatial abilities, enhanced synaptic functions, increased attentional focus, high socioeconomic status, more deliberative decision making, professional and occupational interests in engineering and physical sciences, and high levels of positive assortative mating. To put that in gamer terms for you all, being autistic is like being min-maxed at character selection. It's like imagine sacrificing most of your wisdom for intelligence, social skills and common sense for analytical and academic ability. But even still though, this is a big generalization, and representation in this direction has also gone way too far as well, as I'll discuss in a minute. So, YouTube commenter, whose name I'm going to censor for this video, I appreciate the sentiment and all, but if I seem smarter than the other YouTubers you watch, that's not in spite of me being on the autism spectrum, it's probably directly because of it. I have a friend who I've been close with for nearly 10 years now, whom, for a large majority of the time I've known him, I've been certain was autistic. It was blindingly obvious to me. I never outright told him that I thought this despite noticing so many traits, because I don't think it's fair to encroach on someone's life like that and just outright tell them that you think such a thing unprompted. What I did attempt to do was tell him about my experience and encourage him to seek out a diagnosis, or at least try and follow the process. Some people might say that they think this is basically the same thing, and I disagree. I think there's a big difference. Either way, at the time, my friend didn't want to hear it. He vehemently disagreed and was clearly upset by the implications of what I was saying, and I felt really bad about it, and we agreed to not talk about it again, which killed me. Because one, I'd never been so certain of anything in my life, and two, as self-righteous as it may sound, I was really convinced that I could help him, as he otherwise had a lot of issues with his confidence and self-esteem, something that was drastically improved for me once I got my diagnosis. It was immensely frustrating to finally be on the precipice of having someone I could relate to and talk about these issues in my life with, and for them to just not want to know. In recent years, however, the more they've thought about it and even been prodded by other people on the topic, my friend has come around and even begun the process of trying to get a diagnosis himself. What's come out since is that a large part of the reason he hated the idea that he could be on the spectrum so much was the perception he had of autism. He knew autism to be non-verbal communicators or the fucking guy in Rain Man. You know, Dustin Hoffman's character with the insane mathematical ability and inhuman memory for statistics and basic inability to express emotions. We'll talk about that movie in a minute, but safe to say that this is a great example of the damage done by autistic representation in the media. The thing is that while his conversations with me and others have opened his eyes to the nuances of the autism spectrum, his parents were, and very much still are, in that headspace. They don't like the idea that he could be autistic, because they view it as either people who can't communicate or Dustin Hoffman in Rain Man with no in-between. This lack of nuance in their understanding and lack of willingness to understand has made the process of my friend trying to get to the truth way harder and way more stressful than it needs to be. The depiction of autism in Rain Man is one of the most infamous I can think of. It presents Dustin Hoffman's character as the prototypical autistic savant, someone who can barely feel or express emotion but is inhumanly good with maths and statistics like I mentioned earlier. It's the absolute extreme of my little joke about min-maxing, and a great example of representation being taken too far in the opposite direction of autistic people stupid. However, this movie is from 1988, which in terms of our understanding of autism might as well be 5,000 years ago, so I really don't see much point in talking about that when I can pluck up more recent examples. Last year, the Mass Effect trilogy was re-released with the Mass Effect Legendary Edition, and I finally played through all the games for the first time. Hey, how about that Mass Effect 2, huh? That was great! And how about that DLC, huh? What was it called? Project Overlord? That was weird. Let me give you a brief synopsis of what happens in this DLC. The player, as Shepard, is called to a research base that has recently fallen silent, and when you arrive you find the place overrun with Geth, some of the game's robotic antagonists. As you wade through them, this guy called Gavin Archer explains what happened here. In an attempt to control and subsequently destroy the Geth, this research base sought to fuse a human with a VI, or virtual intelligence, but it's gone wrong. The VI has gone rogue and basically turned into a virus, using the Geth and other technology to kill all the staff and take over. As you progress further through this DLC, taking out the Geth and doing a bunch of technical mumbo-jumbo, a revelation is made. The person who was fused into this VI, Gavin's brother David, is autistic. And despite initially being led to believe that he volunteered, you soon find that he had this forced on him against his will. You listen to audio recordings of how he's so good at maths that he's basically able to communicate with the robotic Geth because he can replicate their speech pattern or some shit, and he has a perfect memory, and there's a bunch of weird ham-fisted references to his autistic mind.
His autistic mind. His autistic mind. His autistic mind is as alien to me as actually.
And how he was the only one they could have hooked up to this VI for a chance at the experiment working, and basically it's Rain Man is what I'm saying, it's fucking Rain Man. As you can imagine, playing through this DLC was a very bizarre experience for me. I wouldn't say it offended me, but I would call it yet another shallow and ignorant depiction of autism in popular media. Mass Effect 2 and this DLC came out in 2010, which in the realm of autism understanding still might as well be 1,000 years ago, and I do find it hard to go off on BioWare's writers too much, as they have generally tried to do right by marginalised people in the past, even if they haven't always gotten it right. I respect them for trying and failing a lot more than those who don't try at all. It's more complicated than this, okay? If you hooked me up to a virtual intelligence, I wouldn't go rogue and raise a fucking robot army. I'd VR myself up a big titty goth GF, crash Facebook and fucking go off grid. If the people on the spectrum and those who study it can hardly even really comprehend it, then maybe you as a writer should stop overstepping your boundaries and thinking that you can. If you're a neurotypical person thinking you can just do a bit of research and immediately create media that is in any way accurate or helpful to autistic people, then I've got one word for you. See ya! Damn, I'm good. Let's talk about real autistic people for a bit and not these ridiculous fucking cartoon characters. Lots of autistic people, such as myself, struggle to hold down regular jobs. I talked a bit about this before in the previous video, but a regular job, or anything like a 9 to 5 or whatever, is my own personal hell. For work experience, I worked a brief stint as a furniture salesman at a charity shop. I basically sold sofas to old people, and whilst I was very good at it, It was easily one of the most depressing periods of my life. My assistant manager was super cool and understanding about my anxieties and was willing to let me work reduced hours, and even then I thought about work for every waking second I wasn't there, struggled to sleep, and never wanted to get out of bed in the morning. This is all a few months before the story I told about the sorting office in the previous video, which is kind of the moment I realised I had to figure out a different path in life. Why do these work environments get me like this? To be honest, I don't know for sure, but I think it comes down to a lot of things. I, for one, am very much a creatively minded person, and being in an office or customer service feels very suffocating. I get intrusive thoughts where I catastrophize over this being the rest of my life and never being able to pursue creative fulfillment. It's also very socially draining. A lot of my social interactions have to be a performance as is, and having to try and blend in with co-workers and customers is just absolutely exhausting. And then there's the matter of executive dysfunction, a concept that I'm sure many of you from all across the spectrum will be intimately familiar with. Any attempt I make to explain it here will only simplify it too much, and I really don't have the time or energy to go in depth on this right now, so I encourage you to do your own research. My point is, work is one of those things where autistic people just really struggle to fit in. Try as you might to acclimate to your condition and mask your symptoms, to a lot of us it just feels incompatible. I've worked on myself a lot, made a lot of changes, had a lot of my own eccentricities brought to light. This is one thing I could never quite conquer. YouTube and streaming is my job, and I'm somewhat embarrassed to say it almost has to be. If not this, then something satisfying, something that creatively fulfills me and that I enjoy. And if I can't do that, then life doesn't seem worth living. Not that I didn't work hard to get here, because I did, but in a lot of ways I am lucky to be able to do this. I am somewhat able to live the compromise I want to. But, and I say this for posterity's sake and not to try and garner sympathy, I don't make a lot of money. I haven't earned money in over 6 months as I make this video, and at the point I'm at on YouTube, it simply feels like I am not proportionately rewarded for how much work I put in. I've been living off savings and basically playing the livelihood lottery every time I make a video, hoping for something to blow up. This is all to say that even if you're someone like me, who had understanding parents, who has 10 years of knowledge of their place on the spectrum available to them, and who has generally been given the opportunity to be pretty well adjusted as far as people on the spectrum go, daily life is still a struggle. If money worries weren't enough, then hey, consider the sheer Herculean task that is making new friends as a self-employed autistic adult. The anxiety of messing up simple daily tasks like cooking and cleaning. I'm someone who, despite being on the spectrum, has had a lot of things in my favour. My mum, in particular, made a very concerted effort to be understanding and accommodating once I got my diagnosis, and let me chase this YouTube thing that a lot of other people in my life, including close friends who simply did not seem to comprehend my position, told me was stupid. And if it's still hard for me, imagine what it's like for other people. I get a lot of people telling me that they never would have guessed that I was on the spectrum, and past thinking to myself, hey, thanks, that's the trauma. I do like hearing that because I've put a lot of work into myself. I've done a lot of reflecting and learnt to mask my less socially acceptable quirks, but like I say, imagine the difference between someone like myself who's been given the opportunity to thrive, at least comparatively, and someone who hasn't been as lucky and who hasn't had as many things go in their favour. We do not live in a world built to support autistic people. As I mentioned before, the system by which you seek out a diagnosis if you're over 16 is a total nightmare, and support is limited and inconsistent to say the least. We live in a world that prioritises productivity above all else, and ideally wants everyone to work laborious 9-to-5s because they are what produces the most. Most autistic people are square pegs in a world of round holes. They can thrive, and they clearly are capable of amazing things, but they're different to neurotypical people. Not better, not worse, different. And yet we live in a world that does not yet take that into consideration and simply wants to push them through the same channels, and this likely will be the case for a long time to come. Even as someone who had so many things working for me, to even get to the point I'm at today, I had to struggle for years against school systems that did not understand my needs, and jobs that made me suicidal. I know this is a cliche example to bring up, but it is meaningful. Many experts on the topic have come to conclude that Albert Einstein was likely autistic. He was said to exhibit echolalia, which I talked about in the previous video, and have delays in his speech. But there's so many others that people don't talk about. Some leading researchers agree that Michelangelo was likely autistic, owed to his obsession with his work and poor social skills. Mozart suffered with sensory overload and had an incredibly short attention span. Fucking Nikola Tesla was extremely sensitive to lights and sound, had a range of phobias, a tendency to isolate himself, and an obsession with the number 3. Seriously, look this up. So many more of the greatest minds in human history are highly speculated to have been on the autism spectrum than you realise. There is a significant male lean here, likely due to our largely male-dominated society, but I've heard names like Emily Dickinson and Barbara McClintock thrown around as well. And do I necessarily believe all of them? No, but there are some very compelling theories out there, and there isn't smoke without fire. I say this because, by and large, despite a natural predisposition against social skills, autistic people have great minds, and it's not all just maths and numbers and memories, it's art, it's culture, it's philosophy. Autistic people have contributed a great deal to this world, and I wonder how much more they could still be doing if our modern society was willing to accommodate them at all. Instead, they end up having to swim against the current, and because of the cutthroat nature of our current capitalist rat race, the ones that do end up on top end up being the likes of Elon Musk, who has outright said that he has Asperger's, and Mark Zuckerberg, who has not outright said he has anything, but who makes my autism radar explode every time I see him. I'm sorry about these men. They are a sign of the times, but we do not claim them. I do worry about playing back into the savant stereotype by bringing up all these incredibly influential people, so I want to make it clear that I bring these examples up to showcase the brilliance autistic people are capable of, but I also want to reiterate that it's complicated. I do not speak for all autistic people, no one does, because the condition is incredibly complex. Some people, despite being on the spectrum, do just fine with regular jobs. They fit in well and are very comfortable with daily life. Some aren't creatively or mathematically driven. There are so many symptoms, and they can all be experienced to such varying degrees that you're never going to be able to nail everyone down, so I'm speaking very generally here. As someone who is not one of those latter people, however, I can't speak from that perspective, so let's keep going. I, like many of the people listed, am very obsessive. I don't mean to compare myself with the likes of Einstein and Tesla, by the way, okay? They could never have made the world's worst review of Minecraft. For the longest time, YouTube was my obsession, and dare I say, on account of the fact that it was monetized and my job, this was a somewhat healthy obsession, because I really don't want to romanticize parts of the spectrum that have undoubtedly hurt so many people, but I do believe such things as healthy, or at least productive obsessions exist. So many of the great minds I've mentioned were utterly obsessive with their work, and they all wound up contributing immensely positive things to this world. I am not yet the great artist or creator that I want to be, but I feel this. This drive to just, I don't know, do something, achieve something big that inspires people. But in my pursuit of this comes the other side of the coin. I have sacrificed a lot in pursuit of art, in pursuit of creativity. I've simply not reached out to people I respect or know I'd get along with for fear of it becoming a distraction to my ambition, and I've shied away from relationships for similar reasons. My social life could be a lot more vibrant than it is, but I'm not comfortable actively trying to build it whilst I still don't feel like I've achieved what I want. And the kicker is that I don't even really know what I want. People's respect and admiration? I don't know, I want a lot. I just think I'll know what it is when I get it. I don't exactly regret this, because it has ultimately made me pretty successful at most things I try my hand at, and will likely continue to do so, but this is that other side of the coin of obsession, and before I had something constructive to channel this obsession into, it manifested itself in much more harmful ways. What I'm about to say I actually cut out of the previous video. I have very knowingly been very vulnerable and very open on this YouTube channel, perhaps more so than even I should have been, because I value real human stories. I think they're fascinating, I think they're helpful, I love hearing about them, and I think by and large content creators on YouTube have forgone them out of, I don't know, fear of being perceived? But the life I've had has led me to be pretty much entirely apathetic as to what other people think of me. I know who I am now, and if I didn't, then that wouldn't have been growth from my trauma. I have had what I could generously call one relationship in my life, and even then, that's tenuous at best. This relationship fell apart because I was obsessive, clingy, I simply got attached too fast and wound up scaring this person off and ruining it for myself. It's been years now and I'm not hung up on that specific failure so much anymore because I've turned my focus to myself, but what does concern me is that I still don't have the answers. I've figured out so much about myself over the years and I still don't know what the fuck happened here or what to do about it. What scares me is the idea that I could wind up in the exact same situation and do this all over again. I'm sure a lot of people on the spectrum can relate to this. Just when you think you've finally got everything figured out, here comes another one. It's like there is forever this invisible wall between you and a neurotypically oriented society that you can never break through in spite of your efforts. I am an obsessive person. This is the way I've been since I was born. It's a part of me now. I've been able to change the quirks that I've grown into or that have been influenced by a combination of my autism and my environment, but something like this feels so fundamental to me. I know it's there, and I think I just can't change it. All I can do is try and make it work for me. I'm not compatible with most people in relationships, fine. I could still do great things with this obsessiveness. I still have things to contribute. This is a very disarming thing I've just said in a fucking YouTube video of all things. I've really gone out on a limb. It's likely the most embarrassing thing to me that I've admitted. But if you're one of those people who I suspect have had similar experiences, I hope this makes you feel less alone. I've had supportive parents, a now seemingly early diagnosis, good friends, and it's happened to me. I responded to this situation for all intents and purposes with very disproportionate sadness, considering how long it had been going on for. None of my friends could understand why I was behaving the way I was. I didn't even really. Despite being on the spectrum, I'm not absolved of responsibility of the way I behaved. It was, frankly, weird, and I definitely wound up upsetting a few people as a result of the place I was in because of this. It can happen to any of us. You know what I did in the embarrassing fallout of my one near relationship falling apart? I decided to get obsessed with something much healthier. I'd had this dusty old classical guitar leaning in the corner of my room for a good few years. I actually talked about this in the New Vegas video. Funnily enough, I forgot to mention it in that video, but I'd actually convinced my mum to buy it for me and told myself I'd learn it to impress a girl I had a crush on many years before. Funny how this stuff works, eh? But once that inevitably went down the shitter, I fell into depression again and told myself that on account of my dyspraxia, I'd never be able to get good at it anyway. This time was going to be different. Every time a negative thought crept in, every time I felt the sting of frustration of my failures come back, I practiced. I practiced until the tips of my fingers went purple, I broke so many strings, and I constantly fucked up. I knew I was learning and improving at a slower rate than most because my dyspraxia presented another significant disadvantage completely out of my control, and I simply did not care. Because it was either put everything I had into this, or be completely left alone with my own thoughts. This wound up being a hugely positive thing for me. To this day, nearly 10 years since I first committed myself to learning, I'd still only consider myself an intermediate guitar player. I'm not as good as I should be considering how much time I've put in, but that doesn't really matter. What matters is that I got through that period, and now I have an outlet for life. Playing guitar without fail makes me feel better every time I'm sad or frustrated, which, if you can believe it, is a lot. This advice extends beyond autistic people. If you're obsessive, don't put all your stock into other people, put it into yourself. My advice to deal with pain and loss will always be to find something constructive, something you can lose yourself in and channel all of that negativity into that. Let it fuel you. You will come out as a better person for it. Here's the other fun major flaw I'm acutely aware of about myself and seem to have no way of outright resolving. The only real reason that conflict arises between myself and the people in my life nowadays is that I've been told by a lot of people in any number of ways that they feel analysed or criticised in my presence, and this puts people on edge. I used to think this was a bit ridiculous, but as time's gone by, I've seen how no one else is really like this. I hate saying this because people always think it's me insisting that I'm smarter than them or something, but I really do feel like I notice a lot of things that people don't about people. I've given up even trying to talk about this with most people in my life because no one wants to hear it, so let me try and explain it to you whilst I have you chained up in my word dungeon. I've insisted numerous times that being autistic is not being better or worse than neurotypical people, it's being different, so it stands to reason that they will be better at some things and worse at other things. One of the things I and most people on the spectrum have been significantly worse at since we were born is social interaction, and in order to get on in this world, to have friendships and relationships and frankly suffer less abuse and harassment, I had, like most of the other people on the spectrum have, had to learn to analyse people. I can honestly say I've studied people a lot, and as almost sad as it is to admit, learnt to imitate them, to replicate the emotions that I never naturally felt at times that it seems they are socially appropriate, and to try and summon them from deep within me at applicable times. Even now, I have a very bad staring problem. I can't help it. Neurotypical people are just fascinating to me. It's a world so outside of my comprehension that I just find myself sitting there and looking at people and thinking, how are they standing? How are they emoting? What's their body language? And so on and so forth. I should clarify, I don't do this intentionally, nor do I do it like a total fucking creep. You know, like I have an understanding of boundaries and privacy. Sometimes it just happens. It's almost like a trance. I'm just like, this is really fascinating, you know, but it's not like, oh god, I just love people. It's there are ways to people watch without being a total freak about it, okay? I promise. Let's just get that out there. And yes, I do think that has led to myself and probably a lot of other people on the spectrum being more emotionally intelligent and more perceptive than the average person, because we've had to try harder. I'm sick of pretending that I don't think this because it only makes sense. And so to balance it out, in case you really think I'm trying to assert some kind of superiority here, here's a bunch of things I still can't do at the age of 24. Drive a car, tie shoelaces, read analog clocks, read bars and graphs, whistle, stack any paper. Let me fucking have this, okay? And so it saddened me to conclude that all these people who fear they're being analysed in my presence probably are. I'm not proud of this, for what it's worth. It's the thing I like the least about myself. I hate that people feel this way around me, but it's another one of those things that just feels fundamental to me. I'd honestly compare it to how we're programmed to recoil at jump scares because our survival instincts kick in. I felt like I had to observe people closely to survive, and now it's just hardwired into me. When it comes to the impersonal, or when it's appropriate to study people in such a manner, this feels like a very useful extra layer of insight that most people don't have. And in the far more common situations where that isn't the case, it's suffocating. A voice in your head that you can't turn off telling you all of these things that you're noticing that are only going to hurt the people around you, because as it turns out, they don't actually like having all of their flaws pointed out to them all the time. This is not a justification for my actions, it's a reason, and they are two different things. I am still ultimately responsible for this, and it upsets me. If it's any consolation, I can promise you that I'm noticing my own flaws more than anyone else's. It's a fun little tidbit that I can't believe I didn't mention in the previous video. When I got my official diagnosis for Autism Spectrum Disorder in 2013, I can't remember exactly how it came about, but the doctor who diagnosed me said this amazing thing to my mum when they were discussing all the times we used to argue. I'll always appreciate this doctor and what she did for me, but I'll never forget that she said this, and that it came from a specialist in this field. She turned to my mum after a slight chuckle and said, quote, "Autistic people have a habit of always thinking they're right." Well, doctor, 9 years later, let me say thank you, and that's probably because they'd be better at your job than you. Another great little encapsulation of how even people in the field don't totally understand the condition there. Before I tie this all together and attempt to justify all my lore dumping, there's one last thing I want to touch on. I won't name and shame this person because they're not really anything to do with me, but I am aware of someone who once used "lots of autistic people are transgender" as a reason for why someone we both know couldn't, and perhaps also shouldn't, be autistic. I guess because this person they knew was so much better than those wacky trans people. I am not transgender, and I do not claim to speak for trans people, and I also don't want to be a hypocrite after calling out Mass Effect 2's writers for their ignorant depiction of autism earlier. I can speak as an autistic person, however, and if you'll allow me, I'd like to unpack this a little bit, because I have something to say. It is true that there is a very significant overlap between people who are trans or non-binary and people who are on the autism spectrum. My question to you is, considering everything I've said today, is this surprising? No one has to rigorously self-critique and self-analyse like autistic people. No one has to look at themselves and think about their place in this world like people on the spectrum. When you have people looking inwards that much, is it really any surprise that so many of them are coming to epiphanies or awakenings on where they stand on the gender spectrum? Is it really such a bizarre and concerning phenomenon that these people have simply come to realizations about their identity when they're forced to examine it so much more than neurotypical people? There is this often hushed and bigoted narrative that so many trans and non-binary people existing on the spectrum is proof that people on the spectrum are faulty and lesser. I believe it's for the exact opposite reasons, because they are capable of a level of introspection that your ignorant little mob of Facebook mums and anti-vaxxers couldn't even comprehend. Perhaps if you did ever choose to think deeply about anything other than alcohol and being a sad cunt, you'd come to realise that your relationship with the gender spectrum was more complicated than you realised. Now shut the fuck up and put the maid costume on. Go on, put it on. I like to think that just recounting my experiences and telling some personal stories about how autism has changed my life is inherently helpful to at least some people. But I do want to try and say something more about it all, to give you a real reason as to why I've bared so much of my soul to you in these videos. Most of the messages in this video I think are pretty obvious. Our perception of autism is and has been completely out of whack for years now. Autistic people can and have contributed far more significant things to this world than people are willing to give them credit for, and being on the spectrum can still be incredibly difficult even for people who have otherwise been given a lot of reasons to succeed. But there's one more I want to highlight. Not everything needs to change. This is going to echo a lot of the sentiment I gave towards the end of the last video, but I want to expound upon it a little bit. When you grow up on the spectrum, or when you grow up with any of its related conditions like ADHD, OCD, Bipolar Disorder and the like, you are growing up with the belief instilled in you that you are incompatible with this world. And there are certainly some things that will need to change for you to survive, but not everything you notice about yourself, and not everything others notice about you is a flaw. It's just a thing. This is something I've realised the closer I've gotten to the friend I mentioned earlier in this video, and as I've watched him come to terms with the idea that he might be on the spectrum. It says a lot that in these last 12 months since the previous video I'm still coming to realisations and having new thoughts about it all. If some of the great minds I mentioned earlier, Einstein, Tesla, McClintock, Mozart, spent all of their mental energy trying to fit in and fix themselves, do you really think they would have wound up contributing what they did? These people are hailed as geniuses and visionaries by the neurotypical world, but consider for a moment that their genius was likely not in spite of their differences to those around them, it was their differences to those around them. These people are held up in such lofty regard because the average person simply couldn't ever think like them. No amount of art theory or science class could give them their perspective. That is their strength, their difference. So it's important to remember that the perfect person doesn't exist, and striving to be such a thing is ultimately wasted. You can and should strive to be the best person you can be, but not everything is meant to be ironed out. Some things are just you. They're a part of you, and they always will be. You can't get rid of them, so use them. I have admitted in this video to countless mistakes, to flaws that I'm aware of, and yeah, I'm going to keep trying to work on them, but if I never fix them, I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. I've already come so far. I have changed so many things in my life. I have worked on myself so much, agonized over my identity. I think I can forgive myself for not having the energy to do it forever. There comes a point in your life where you've done so much that I think you're just allowed to say to yourself, yeah, that's me. I have flaws. I'm a human. Don't let this life beat you down to an unrecognizable shape, because a lot of your little edges and cracks are the things that keep you an individual, and they'll probably end up playing a huge part in your eventual contribution. You don't need to change everything about yourself. If you do, you won't be yourself. One thing that's always made me kind of groan a little bit is those really non-specific, impersonal messages of like general sentiment that you see on social media. You know, stuff that just says like, you are loved and you are not alone and stuff. I sit there and look at these sometimes and I'm just like, well, what if I am alone? You don't know me. It's a nice idea, but I just don't feel like it's ever really helped anyone. If you put that same energy into just saying something a bit more specific and with a bit more meaning, you might actually be able to really brighten someone's day. So let me say this without having met all of them. I unconditionally believe in the potential of autistic people. Not because it's a nice thought or because of hopeful sentiment, but because of science, because of history, because of objective facts. To be on the spectrum and to truly believe that because of that you don't have anything to offer is to deny the objective. Everything around you is telling you that you can succeed. It is going to be harder than it is for most people, and that sucks and it isn't fair, but it's also going to make your eventual success all the greater and all the sweeter. If you're on the spectrum and you're watching this, I truly hope you take everything I've said in this video to heart. I truly hope you don't let the unfairness of the world stop you from achieving the amazing shit that I know you are capable of. I don't intend on letting it stop me, and hopefully I'll see you on the bright side. I really want to be a force for good in this community if I can help it. I want to try and be something positive for autistic people. I also want spots to not grow on my bottom lip just as I'm about to record, but we can't all fucking get all we want, can we? I've been very tuned out of the discourse around the spectrum for a long time. I've not really been kind of a part of the community, so to say, but I want to be more involved and I want to do stuff like this more often. So please, you know, podcasts, interviews and shit, whatever people have got going where they want to talk about this kind of stuff and they want to talk to someone about it, I'm throwing my hat in the ring. Like, please put my name out there. I'd love to do stuff like this more often. I'm happy to talk about it with most people, well, most people that I can trust, you know, no offense. But yeah, there's a couple things that I think need to be said before I kind of wrap this up. One, I said this in the last video and it's still the case, I am not a professional. I'm not a professional or a specialist. I have no qualifications on this topic. You should not take everything I say as gospel. I'm just a guy who's lived with it all his life and I'm giving you my opinion and my takes on it, and you can take from that whatever you want, you know? And secondly, it's going to sound a bit harsh, but I think it needs to be said, you need to remember that I'm not your friend. You don't know me. You know, as much as I talk about my life and give you real life stories in these videos, that doesn't mean that you know me. These videos are a very controlled environment. I am in control of what you see and everything you hear from me, and anything I don't like I can simply cut out. You know, the way I present myself is all very carefully controlled. This might come as a shock to you, but there are some things about my real life that I don't talk about in these videos. There are things that I withhold because they're irrelevant or simply too private to me. These kind of videos, I worry about people putting me on a pedestal and developing some kind of weird creator-fan relationship with me, and I don't want that. You know, it's why I don't have a Discord, because I think that fosters that kind of thing, and I just have no interest in that stuff. So if anyone ever wonders why I don't have a Discord, there you go. That's it. It's because I think there should be a barrier between a creator and their viewers. I announced last month that I was walking away from YouTube for an unspecified amount of time because the financial inconsistency was too much and for various few reasons. However, it is a very, very weird time in my life right now. I put a statement up about this on my Twitter, and I also made a big YouTube community post about it. I'm not going to go into depth on the reasons why, but for a multitude of reasons, ironically enough, to financially secure myself, I need to come back to YouTube and basically do what I was doing before, but maybe even more so, you know, maybe to an even greater extent. I don't know. I need to stay afloat. So after this video, it's kind of going to be back to pretty much business as usual for a while. You know, it's a bittersweet thing because I have some ideas that I'm really excited about and some stuff that I think will be really good, but I don't know if I'm mentally prepared for it to, you know, for the algorithm to do its thing. I don't know. We'll see. I have to do it. So with that in mind, the Patreon is back in full force. Please, anyone who can support the Patreon, it is much appreciated. It's a huge deal for me, so thank you so much. And thank you so much to the people who have already done it and who maintained their support for me over the period where I was gone. Sorry. Also, I stream a lot more often now. I put my Twitch name up here. I just recently streamed a full playthrough of Dark Souls for the first time, which went over really well and was really cool. And on Tuesday, March 2nd, or March 1st, I think it's March 1st, I'm going to be streaming Undertale for the first time ever. Never played the game before. I know a lot about it because everyone does, but I've never played it before. It will be a first time ever playthrough of Undertale, so that should be fun, should be exciting. I'm uploading the highlights of the Dark Souls thing and other various clips to my second channel, Extra Fudj. So subscribing to that is free, and it's also really, really helpful to me because I'm trying to get that thing monetized, and it's nearly there, so I would greatly appreciate that. And finally, merchandise, baby. The Fudj merch, I'll put it somewhere all over the screen. I'm really proud of it. I set it up with the guys over at Patchwork. Shout outs to them, always helpful as can be. Shirts, mugs, socks, it's all good stuff. I'm really happy with it. So buying some of that is also a great way to support me. Not much more to say other than that, and to reiterate the points I've already made. I'm not a professional, we're not friends, but I do genuinely hope you got something out of this, you take something away from it. I did still mean everything I say, obviously. I do still unconditionally believe in the potential of autistic people. I don't know, I hope that's something. I really hope that's something for you. I really did mean these stories and these things I say and these opinions I give. So, yeah, I'll see you again soon. Fucking, here goes nothing. We're all just trying our best, eh? See you soon.